someone who aspires to govern this country, it is an abdication of leadership to sidestep a crucial economic issue between our two countries and just focus on politics.
An abdication of leadership. That's the Natural Resources Minister, Joe Oliver. He was on this show earlier as well, blasting the NDP leader, Tom Mulcair, for criticizing Canada's environmental record on the world stage. The opposition leader is in the U.S. Capitol today. He says he's raising concerns about job losses, but he says he's not calling on President Obama to reject the Keystone XL pipeline. The question is, why not? He says that project will cost Canadians 40,000 jobs, and some are wondering, should Tom Mulcair have taken a stronger stand? Joining me now is the NDP's natural resources critic, Peter Julian. Good to have you on the program, Mr. Julian.
Good to be here.
All right. We heard from Minister Oliver in a minute earlier in the program. I'll get to what he had to say, but let's just put this on the record. Mr. Mulcair in Washington says he's leaving the Keystone decision to the Americans. But let me just get this straight. Is the NDP formally opposed to the Keystone XL pipeline?
Well, we've said that we have real concerns about the exports of jobs. We don't think it's in Canada's economic interest to export tens of thousands of jobs down to the United States. But I think, Evan, the dynamic is different. The discussions are different in Canada than they are in the United States. In the United States, it's very much an issue around climate change, and that's why you've got people around the Obama administration voicing concerns about this project, and the New York Times as well taking an editorial position.
So why isn't Mr. Mulcair, if it's so clear for the NDP you don't want this pipeline, you think it's an export of Canadian jobs, why isn't he in Washington saying don't give the green light to this pipeline? Why was he so neutral about it?
Well, he's not down in the United States to tell the Americans how to decide in a project of this scope. What he is in the United States to do is to meet with a wide variety of stakeholders, members of Congress, the Congressional Budgetary Officer, of course, because we see in Canada how the Harper government has actually usurped the independence of the Budgetary Officer in Canadian Parliament. In the United States, we want to look at those best practices. So he's visiting with a wide variety of political actors in Washington, and will be in New York as well. And that's an important role of leadership that he plays as leader of the opposition.
If he really believes that 40,000 Canadian jobs are at stake, I don't understand why he wouldn't then, if that's his actual belief, why wouldn't he go down in the States and fight to save those Canadian jobs? It seems to me that it is very much a priority, if he believes that would protect Canadian jobs, to voice his opinion on the Keystone pipeline.
Well, I mean, Evan, that's not the role he's playing right here. It's not to go down to the United States and tell them what to think. The Obama administration has a difficult decision to make, and the reality is the actions of the Harper government have undermined the ability of Keystone to be approved. There's no doubt in my mind of that. There are cutbacks to the approach to the environment, and cutbacks as well in approaches internationally to battling the greenhouse gases and climate change. That has undermined the Harper government's credibility in Washington.
But with all due respect, isn't the leader of the opposition's job, and he says this every day, to protect Canadian jobs? Again, I just want to go, you're saying it's not his job to tell the Obama administration what to do, but isn't his job to advocate for ideas that, in his view, protect Canadian jobs? The government's down there advocating for the pipeline. They say it will create jobs. Mr. Mulcair says it will cost Canadian jobs. I still, frankly, don't totally appreciate why he wouldn't make that case.
Evan, there's two different debates taking place. In Canada, the debate is around value added. We've lost 500,000 manufacturing jobs in this country. We think the Harper government is wrong-headed in its approach to try to export jobs out of the country when we have lost so much of our manufacturing and value-added base. That's the debate in Canada. The debate in the United States is around climate change, and what Tom Mulcair is doing as leader of the opposition is talking very forcefully about how Canada, under an NDP government, of course, will be looking to work as partners with the United States in battling climate change. Right. But they're two different debates. It's two different issues in two different countries.
I'll tell you something. What's interesting here is one of the reasons Mr. Mulcair said he was going down to Washington was to introduce NDP ideas. And on this program, our audience will hear me talk to Lee Terry. He's a Republican congressman from Nebraska. He wants to green light, he wants to fast track the Keystone XL pipeline. But you know what he said to me? He said, I understand that everyone in Canada is in agreement on the Keystone XL, and he says he's selling that to the rest of the Congress, that Canadians agree it's a good idea, and it's just the Americans who are split on it. Clearly that's not the case. So I wonder, by not voicing his concerns, he's leaving congressmen like Lee Terry at the forefront of this debate, basically able to tell Congress Canadians are united on the Keystone XL pipeline.
Well, I think any member of Congress that's following the debate and is concerned about Canadian political opinion would understand that there are different points of view held in Canada as well. I think the New York Times editorial certainly set that out very clearly. So I think I'd have to disagree with you respectfully that what we have is two different debates taking place in two different types of issues. And in the United States, Tom Mulcair, as leader of the opposition, is showing leadership and going down and making the contacts that need to be made as leader of the opposition with the American administration and with key players in the American Congress.
Minister Joe Oliver on the program today. He heavily criticized your leader, Tom Mulcair, today for not making the case, saying he doesn't protect Canadian jobs, and he's abdicated leadership. What do you make of Joe Oliver's comments?
I think Joe Oliver is desperate, quite frankly. The Harper government has sadly misplayed this whole issue. They've been trying to use political spin on issues around the environment and climate change. And the reality is, given the new political realities in the United States, the Obama administration saying very clearly that the United States has to play a leadership role in fighting climate change, the political sands have shifted. The debate is different now than it was. So for the Harper government to try to rely on spin and attacking opponents, rather than dealing with the fundamentals, that they've gutted environmental assessment in this country, that they have pulled Canada out of Kyoto, they refuse to deal with the reality of climate change, one of the few administrations in the world that just seems to not be able to contend with the importance of dealing with climate change. For all of those reasons, what the Harper government has done is undermine its own credibility in Washington. That's the fault of Joe Oliver and the ministers that are refusing to take action.
You know, Joe Oliver has a different point of view. Let me just present it to you. I'm sure you've heard it before from him. He says, and by the way, many congressmen, like this congressman on the program today, Lee Terry, says the State Department has released a draft analysis of the Keystone proposal that found there would be no significant environmental impact to most resources along the proposed route. This is the new route, and that other options to get the oil from Canada to the Gulf Coast refineries are worse for climate change. So he said, Joe Oliver says, Tom Mulcair, NDP, you don't trust the science. What's your response when they say, why don't you trust the State Department's analysis that has taken more than 1,000 days on this?
Well, Evan, first off, for Joe Oliver to talk about science when the Harper government has muzzled Canadian scientists, has ripped apart 99% of the environmental assessments that used to be done in Canada by the last budget, and closing the scientific research stations. It's a bit rich for Joe Oliver to talk about that. I think the Harper government has shown
but on the State Department, and I get that debate. We have that debate a lot, and it's a fair debate. But just what about the science of this particular pipeline? That the State Department studied it, two big studies on it. They say there's been a lot of assessments. They've rerouted the thing around the Ogallala Aquifer now. What's wrong with the science of the pipeline?
Well, first off, as you know, that State Department assessment is only the first step in a public consultation process that kicked off a couple weeks ago. And it's been criticized, I think quite justly, because of the ties of the company that did the assessment and the contractor for the project itself. So what we have is a situation where the public in the United States is now being consulted on that, and I think the Obama administration, the State Department, is hearing back from the public for Mr. Oliver to pretend that this is some kind of final assessment when we all know that it was an initial assessment subject to public consultation. I think is doing a disservice to the public. What Joe Oliver, I think, has to do is take a step back and look at the actions of his own government. They have failed manifestly on issues of climate change. They have tarnished Canada's reputation abroad in terms of the environment. And because of all that, this project, if it's not approved, It's the fault of the Harper Conservative government itself, because they have not taken seriously environmental impacts and the impacts of climate change that Americans certainly are taking increasingly with a great deal of seriousness.
All right, Peter Julian, the NDP Natural Resources critic, responding to Joe Oliver's criticism of Tom Mulcair's trip to Washington. I appreciate your time today, sir.
My pleasure, anytime.